Bye. Hey, good morning, Jason. How you doing?
Apparently good enough that I forgot to hit the countdown started before I hit go live. So there was probably like a second of us before I actually got to it.
Oh my gosh, that's well, there are a couple people out there, so that's all good. Well, hey, I'm Brett Chittum with CNWR, and you are
Jason Slagle, CNWR. We'll see if we get a surprise Tom appearance this morning because he had threatened it. I think last time we were talking about doing this one. I see him in the audience.
Can he actually can join without us inviting him, can he?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess he has that power.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're talking about OML and operational maturity level. And does yours as a managed service provider meet your clients?
Yeah, this is a thought that I don't know. I've had a couple of really good, like long conversations that came out of the Auth 66, basically the video a day thing I was doing on LinkedIn, and one of them was around this thought. Like it kind of, it's very much the case of building on ideas. So like me and a couple other people are going back and forth, and it kind of built into like me, running with my marathon training I'm doing right now. I'm spending a lot of time on a treadmill, and it got me thinking. And during the thinking, I was like, you know what? The actual problem is here. The actual problem is an operational maturity and a mismatch. That's probably the biggest indicator for me that we're going to have trouble with the client. And yeah, so I thought we'd talk about what that is a little bit, where it came from, some other things associated with it, and what you can do about it, which unfortunately the reality is not a lot, but we'll talk it through.
Well, I mean, you can't do much for the other client unless you can. Wait a minute, hold on. If we're doing correct account management and stuff, and we're helping that client as a VCIO, like we talked about last week, I mean, we can assist, right? I'm going to be the devil's advocate.
So there are two spaces where it falls apart. One is if your operational maturity is considerably below that of your client. The other is
that would fall apart definitely.
Yeah.
Oh no!
See, Wild Tom has appeared.
We knew he was coming in.
I had to turn. I realized I was like, wait, I got double speak. I fixed it.
Oh my gosh, Tom, what is up?
Yeah, I mean, the other one is if the client's too low, and that's the whole point of this discussion here. If the client's too low, the chances of you bringing them up before it explodes is probably not very high. So let's talk it through.
Yeah, so we've obviously talked about operational maturity level, but if you want to know more, you can actually Google it.
Yeah.
And do you want to put the link in the notes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use here's the link. I'm gonna drop it in our private channel. Can I comment links?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can comment links. But if you throw it, make sure message it or whatever, I'll make sure it gets in the description. You can edit the description live.
Yeah.
It'll update on YouTube automatically.
So I mean, so we don't want to really, because just talking about that brings you into a different it'll take all our time. But it's usually IT specific, right? So this was written more in the IT space.
Yep.
But I mean, the principles of it can go to any business.
Yeah, it was, and it's derived from the Carnegie Mellon University capability maturity model, which was specific to software development. And it's a 1 to 5 scale that defines your maturity as an IT organization. Again, this is really IT focused, but I think it can encompass a business as a whole, right? Like, and as I approach this, I tend to find in most cases that maturity in an IT model or your IT business reflects the maturity in your business as a whole. Like it's very infrequent. Well, Maybe. It's very infrequent I run into a very immature organization that has a very mature IT organization. I do occasionally run into mature organizations that have immature IT organizations.
Yeah, you find that when you're doing an assessment, or
Yeah.
And
when
I
we're
think
just
it's
going
important to
into
point out,
prospect with, when they're a prospect.
and I think it's important to point out, conversation we had, maybe 8 a.m. I started dropping in there. The company in question here is over 100 years old, second generation running it, clearly not operationally mature, which is why they are trying to figure out how to redo the phone system themselves, because that's a great idea.
Yeah, that was a interesting
It's a sign of
one.
non-operational maturity. It's not a gauge. This is a successful, profitable company, but they behave in a way that makes them extremely difficult to work with, despite the fact of their success. So it's just one of those. It's not alignment. It's they want to do it themselves in some of the weirdest, or especially in our IT opinion, possibly worst way possible.
Yeah,
and it means they're not a fit for us.
Yeah, correct. And there's a lot of that, right? We'll get through there and we'll talk through that. I learned of this from Service Leadership from Paul Dipple. I think in our space, he's probably the one that puppets it the most and talks about it the most. They were acquired a handful of years ago by ConnectWise. So now it's Service Leadership by ConnectWise or whatever the case is. But they really use OML in their modeling. And that's how they grade you, right? So we've been through the full OML questionnaire a handful of times. I think the first time, which was probably 4 years ago, I think we scored middle of the road, like 2.8 or something. And I think by the time we went through and started actually focusing on it, the last time we took it, we were like 3.5, 3.7. So we were in the high threes. My guess if I took it now, would probably be in the low fours.
And for people out there, it's a 1 through 5 model.
Yes, correct.
So it's really it's an interesting thought. I don't know if anybody can actually achieve 5. You could probably come pretty close.
People do. I mean, or they get pretty close. There's a lot of it, like, where we get knocked these days are some of the financial controls. Like this is the first year I have a budget for the first time ever. It's interesting. I don't know how much it'll impact how we change or do things, but we have one and we have forecasts now and things like that. And that's part of that process, right? Like you can't hit 5 unless you have a budget. Like we've always had a budget, right? But we've never had a written budget. And there's a Home Assistant green sitting back there that wasn't budgeted, but now it exists, and things like that. So it's stuff.
Yeah, but I think we relatively live within our means. I mean, it's not like we are going over budget.
We try to.
It's and I think that's another thing too. There are some businesses that are credited to the hilt. I mean, they've got a lot of liabilities out there.
Yeah, and we have no debt.
Yeah.
I mean, other than the building, but even that, we don't technically have debt right now. We have debt to Alan because I think he carries the note essentially until we eventually maybe go get a mortgage. But CMWR as a company has no debt at the moment, which is, we're very proud of that. And we've taken it's probably slowed our growth a little bit, right? But I'm okay with that.
I think it's a better way to grow because that's how I grew my company with no debt, and it makes it a lot easier. You don't have this burden hanging over you, and you don't have someone who can call the shots for you. Leverage that debt to have you do things. This is where the VCs and startups don't get aligned. They get over leveraged on a VC, and the VC says, well, I'm just going to acquire a board seat to make it the way I think it should be.
My wife and I are halfway through season 3 of Succession, and it's so interesting how much I can compare that to so many other companies and stuff that I know exist and I'm dealing with. And I'm like, oh, you drew direct inspiration from X and things like that. So it's really interesting.
How did you know this company existed to get this information?
Yeah.
Well, so you talked about the planning and budgeting, which we do.
Yeah.
But like I was reading through our show notes, and low OML tends to be more reactive. So meaning high OML tends to be what? More
proactive, right? Low OML companies tend to just deal with problems as they come up, right? They tend to not plan. They tend to not budget. They tend to not do preventative maintenance, right? Like they tend to approach IT like you would approach a low-priced consumer electronic, right? So they view their computers like toasters. You know, you don't fix a toaster. You don't do preventative maintenance on toaster. If your toaster breaks, you go out and buy a new one. Right. Whereas higher operational maturity companies tend to approach them more like cars or buildings. Like these are systems that require regular maintenance and need to be taken care of. And if you tune them up and keep them, the preventive maintenance on them done, they will operate better, which will result in less unplanned downtime later. And I think there's a lot of parallels. I mean, that's the most obvious parallel you can draw, but that's the big difference between, I think, a low operational maturity and a high operational maturity company.
That's a good analysis too on that, because especially in our space, I mean, how many managed service providers are providing that that end of life information and then working to
all of them are. That's how they make sales.
Yeah, I mean that, and so that's an important thing. And when our clients don't align with our OML, that tends to be an issue, right? Where that's what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, one of the big things there, I mean, on top of that, right, like they're more reactive, but they also tend to not use standard processes, right? So like, and where that comes into play is the things that directly drove this. You know, we have a couple of clients that they on the former, so I'm gonna segment this a little bit, and I'm gonna talk about some of the former or some of the CWR like longtime clients. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the former Lawrence clients a little bit with it, right? And we have a handful of clients on the CWR side, the longtime CWR side, that they just want to go out and either build white boxes or they want to go out and buy whatever's on sale at a given place, right? They don't want to run standardized hardware, and what they don't realize, and you know, at some point I'm not willing to fight that fight. It's like, you know, if you really, I'll explain to you 6 times why the fact that you're saving $200 on that PC probably isn't a $200 savings over the lifetime of that PC. But like, I can only tell you that 7 or 8 times before I'm just going to tell you to go buy it yourself. And then, you know, I end up making up the cost difference in the additional labor to come get it from you and deliver it, whatever, right? Like it is what it is. But what those companies don't realize is that not having that stuff standardized means that every one of them is bespoke. I can't roll out driver updates in a tested fashion, especially for CAD CAM PCs, right? It's like 16 of these things have an Asus 3070 in them. You know, the other 2 have a MSI 4060, and then this one over here has a Gigabyte 4070 in it. And it's like, okay, all of those in theory use the NVIDIA driver packs, right? But like there are slight differences between those cards that mean that I can't approach them in a standardized fashion.
Right. You can't do a mass rollout.
Yeah, it's hard to do mass rollout. It also means that my ability to do hardware swaps is a little more limited, right? Especially in the case of CPU architectures or motherboard chipset stuff, like where you end up having to do additional work on top of it. It's less of a case these days than it probably was 20 years ago. But it's definitely still the case where, you know, you can't just move a drive or move hardware and have a good experience with it.
Right.
And go ahead.
Kind of back to the standardization, you can kind of gauge that in a different way when you go to the client. You take someone like a landscaping company. Do you see a bunch of beat up equipment all hodgepodge together? Yeah. There's some duct tape and straps on this tractor over here. Or do you see a row of all the same brand, all well maintained? Yep. Clean garage. Those are little things you can go to places and kind of gauge whether or not they're operationally mature, or people that are just, like you said, being very bespoke. They're buying random things off auctions. The owner's running around solving every problem in some manual intervention way. And you're like, I'm now going to become part of this. If I walk in there and sell this in that room over there, I'm now going to be one of these bespoke things that they view of. Maybe they put their fingers in it one day, maybe they forget about the next day, but there's certainly just this round robin of chaos on there.
You know, I've been in this industry a long time, and in my younger days, dumber days, I used to think that, oh man, all that bespoke knowledge that I hold makes me a good employee. It makes me hard to get rid of. It doesn't. It 100% doesn't. The company won't go out of business. They won't go away. I've learned that lesson several times where I thought, oh, they're screwed without me. No, they chug on. Maybe they're slightly less efficient, but they figure it out, right? Business has a way. But you know what the other side of that is? It means I can't go on vacation.
Yeah.
Right.
It means that you're basically, indispensable flows both ways. Because I promise you're not indispensable, but as long as you're there, they will treat you like you're indispensable and not in the way that is beneficial to you.
Right. Well, I've always told people that if you can put your hand in a bucket of water and remove your hand and leave a handprint, you're irreplaceable, you're indispensable. But I don't know if anybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, we alluded to this applies to businesses as well.
Yep.
And I'm just looking, the use of standard processes.
So that's what I was driving to earlier is that, right? Like if you have standardized processes, it even comes down to things like new hires, right? It's like we tend to ask companies to give us 3 days notice on a new hire, right? It's a process that in many cases is we've automated some amount of it, right? But every company has their own little things that you have to do. Like this company may need people added to a printer and, the certain line of business access that we can't automate and stuff like that. And what I find is the high operational maturity companies have no issue providing us notice. They insert us into their normal HR process and everything's fine. The low operational maturity companies forget about notifying us that they have an employee until the morning the employee starts. And then they're all angry with us that we can't rearrange the entire world to get, 2 hours worth of work done in 10 minutes. It's 100% a maturity and an operational maturity problem, right? It's not like you didn't know. It's not like you hired that guy and they started 10 minutes later, right? Like there was a hiring process.
There was a process that was involved. We just had this with the client, and honestly, when we were talking to that client the week prior to this person returning back to work, we said, well, send us the information so that we can set a ticket up and get it rolling. And then the information came in after business hours on Friday night.
Yeah.
And the guy was starting Monday morning. So but we tried to get that information from them prior to, and it's interesting because you and I have talked in Sidebar, and I know Tom has too, about when your OML does not meet with your clients and your OML is higher, it seems to be an issue. Those clients seem to be more problematic.
They're not problematic. I mean, it's a mismatch, right? Like it's so the notes that I wrote this morning are how I feel. Like I think it will likely work one above or below where you're at, right? So if you're like a 3.5, you can probably service a 2.5 to 4.5. The edges, the 2.5s and the 4.5s will probably be a little rough, but you can probably make it work, right? But if you're like a 3.5 and you're trying to service a 2, you're going to get frustrated, right? Like it's going to be a bad time because you're just constantly going to be pulled into the reactive mess that, the low operational maturity company has. And, we're to the point now as a business that, 80% of the text days are scheduled now, right? It's like we have a dispatcher and she comes in and she loads up the text days with what they're working on that day. And we leave gaps for emergencies, and we leave gaps for service desk tickets as they come in, especially with the people. And we'll rearrange if we have to for non-critical items if we have an emergency come up, right? But like it really messes with our process if we consistently have tickets that come in and I need to drop everything and work on this thing, right? Because especially like we account for that. But when it happens consistently, then this is a lack of planning on your part, right? This isn't an emergency. This is you didn't bother to tell us. And over time, that wears on the relationship with that client, because then my dispatcher's angry because she's got to rearrange a bunch of stuff. My techs are angry because they've done prep work for the thing they're working on, or they get pulled in the middle of a task, right? And everyone just generally becomes unhappy.
Well, think about it. The cost to re-engage yourself in a task you're working on when you're pulled off of it, there's cost in that too. So it increase our cost when that happens, and I would imagine in their business model, it's increasing their cost too.
the flip side is also true, right? Like if you are a low operational maturity, say you're a small MSP and you are whale fishing and you think you can take on that, low Fortune 1000 company that's got, 10,000 employees, they probably have gotten to that point by having an operational maturity that's going to be fairly significantly higher than yours. And while it's possible you may win it on price, the long-term health of that relationship, unless you can level up your OML very quickly, is not going to work out, because the same things that frustrate you, right? They're going to want planning. They're going to want good documentation. They're going to want to see your processes, right? They may start driving you down compliance or cybersecurity roads that, as an operationally immature company, are really hard to get down. And, as a result, you have another mismatch there, right? So I think that business works best when you're kind of bracketed within that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not that companies can't become more mature. We actually have a client that came from Lawrence Systems, now is a CNWR client. And I remember when the owner called me and was excited about the new building they bought and said, we'd like to do the wiring. I said, hey, that sounds great. He goes, we want to move in next week. I was like, that's not rational. They at the time only had about 20 employees, but still wiring 20 employee building is really hard. Come all the way today, they have warehouses of stuff, and we have a much better working relationship with them because we've all matured kind of at the same thing. It's kind of nice to see some of the clients that have matured over time with us.
Yeah.
I think we should really mention what are some of the things to watch out for maybe in the process. So, because it's not like you can say, before we do the sales call, can you fill this OML out?
Yeah.
So let's talk about,
Take
how
this
we actually
test
turn this
for
into
us,
actionable for MSPs to know how to avoid them. I mean, I can say obvious things like, if you see duct tape and beat up equipment all over the yard, if they're a landscaping company, you might have a hint, but that's not always as obvious.
Right. No, that is true, because, you think about it. I'm just thinking about the old LTS days and going on site on things, and that pretty much holds true. I mean, you walk in and see a hodgepodge of things.
If all their equipment's different, right? If you walk in and it looks like all their equipment was purchased from Best Buy, they're probably operationally immature, right? If everything is Windows Home and they're a business, they're probably operationally immature. If they're using a personal 365 account and installing Office using the 5 installs on 5 Office PCs, they're violating the license terms,
and they're also
definitely operationally immature.
Right.
I think the questions you have to ask the people when you come in is, hey, are you ready to get this right? Are you ready to have us go through this, assess it, put together a uniform solution for this? And then you can ask some questions regarding hiring, for example. Do you have a hiring process, and where do you see us fitting in with this? And if they go, we just randomly pick people up and then hire them, and we don't really have a process for this, there's kind of a misalignment on there. But it's kind of just driving the questions down the road for them, is saying, are you willing to change these things that I see that are obvious related to technology? And are you ready to have processes, or do you have existing processes? And where do you see us fitting in? Let's have a conversation about that. And I can even be done as part of the early sales process, because you're also signaling to them, we understand how these things work. We are going to integrate into your business. We're not just a cost center. We're a enhancement of what you do. We're going to provide technology that does that. And we're going to fit into the process of your hiring, your offboarding, your security, and hopefully some of the efficiencies of your operation.
I mean, we do paid assessments now, gating MSP pricing. And the paid assessments tend to weed out, they probably weed out some operationally mature companies. I tend to find that it very much weeds out the ones that are not operationally mature or operationally mature, because you can have a conversation with somebody as to why when the guy down the street's doing a free assessment, I'm doing a paid assessment, and it comes down to a value, right? It's like, okay, if they're offering you something for free, how much effort do you think they're putting into it, and what kind of resources do you think they're leveraging to do the work? And the answer to that is they're not putting a lot of effort in, and they're leveraging sales resources. They're not leveraging billable technical resources, right? Whereas the assessments we do, they average. Actually, we just had this discussion in our leadership team meeting that I had assumed that I had bucketed 10 to 15 hours, but they're in reality taking, because we've increased the depth of some things, they're taking 15 to 20 hours to complete and turn around, right? And we we get a good gauge during that paid assessment process of the operational maturity, because we do ask a lot of policy questions, right? And they're IT specific. A lot of them are around cyber because we're trying to assess them against TIS, IG1, right? So it's like we want to know if they have acceptable use policies, if they have, data retention policies, electronic fund transfers policies, things like that are very important, I believe, these days for businesses to have, but operationally mature businesses won't. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you don't have them, right? If you recognize that you probably need them and you're willing to get there, then that's the first step in leveling up, right? It is right. And we started, I think, in the high 2s, low 3s when we first started doing it, and I would guess we're closer to 4 now. And it's taken active effort to be more consistent in what we do to get there.
So when you look at the last statement, businesses grow, OML changes, and you type this, and I like this: if a mismatch occurs, the lower needs to level up or reevaluate. I like that. I actually, that almost should be in quotations, man. I like how you wrote that.
And we can help level up a company on the IT side if they're willing to make the journey with us. And if they level up on the IT side, then they will likely see the benefits of doing that, and it'll start to raise up the rest of their business. Right. But we can't force it. And if it's not working, it's not working. And at some point or another, like, we just both need to recognize that, hey, this isn't a good fit. Like, I think, Tom, you had an example of that, or one of you two, where you had said a company approached you and said, I feel like you've outgrown us.
That was Tom.
Yeah. And it's just, they want things that we can't do. I'm honest with them. You have to figure that out. They're like, oh, we want to be able to still call an individual tech every time. They were upset that you couldn't just get them on the phone and be like, well, I used to just call them whenever I wanted. I'm like, yeah, but they're scheduled out for tickets. This is the only way. It's something that if you're a small MSP, you can't see what it looks like to be the big MSP. That's one of the reasons we do these videos, is trying to give you some insight of that efficiency we gain by doing that. But there are sacrifices that have to be made. You can't just have techs at the ready, at the phone, ready to do that, because I can't pay them what the tech wants to make. This is how you lose those really skilled techs, is because they can't level up. They can't make the wage that you're looking to make. And the only way to pay them the wage is to book up, like you said, about 80% of their day with billable stuff. You can't just say, just wait by the phone, chill out, like the Maytag repairman.
That's the biggest thing, is that I'll usually have a tech available if you have an emergency, right? But I don't. But the fact that Minesweeper won't open is an emergency to me, right? Like, it's it's just we have a very defined.
Was that an actual ticket?
No. But I mean, we've had some equally ridiculous tickets. Clients, they'll put in an unblock request for a domain that is clearly not business related, and then get all bent out of shape when it's not been done for 6 hours, right? Like,
they'll be upset that I can't even say some of the sites. Before someone goes to the wrong spot, it's actually nothing naughty. It's more like lottery sites or things like that. It's way less interesting than you ever would hope.
Discount shopping sites. And
hold on. We do have a company that is in the marketing space, and they do have some sites they've gone to that we're like, what? Oh no, they need to do that for research.
Well, that's a different topic.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, I think the last point that I want to touch on here is that I think it's important if you are looking to acquire or be acquired, that you make sure that the OML is somewhat of a match. I will say openly that that Tom and Brett, you have basically two groups of clients that I'm going to talk about. Like, I'm going to call them the former computer store clients from when you did retail. And then you have the more traditional MSP clients that came after the YouTube channel was successful. And the former computer store clients, for better or worse, are somewhat of an OML mismatch in many cases, because they're used to just being able to bring their computers into the computer store to get them fixed, whatever random one they bought from Best Buy. And it just doesn't work with the business model, the MSP business model. And slowly over time, right, we're trying to level up those customers as we can. But at some point, some of them, we've started cutting the bottom side out of it. I find that they're not having a great time with it. and they also tie up a bunch of administrative time because it's the same group of clients that are challenging every bill, right? They're putting a lot of billing questions, and they just tie up a lot of back end time. So, we've now begun the process of, okay, this gap is so big, we're not going to be able to fix it. Hey, here's another provider. You might want to go talk to them instead.
And at least we provide a solution, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. We've given them somebody else. Tom, you've had conversations with the people we're now moving them to, and you've set those up, which has been nice.
Yeah, we gave them a path forward. We, hey, there is a computer store. I reached out to them. I talked to that computer store. I know the people there. We gave them a path forward, and I was very clear with these clients. And this is something I got some notes for that I'd actually shared internally with like Jason, talking about the journey of selling my company. I want to do like a 7-month follow-up, but I was accepting, and me and Jason were very clear from the merger, prior to the merger and long after, that yes, it's not that we want these clients to go away, but there's a choice they're going to be given. They're going to follow this more mature model, or they will have to go somewhere else. But I don't want to throw them out there to no one. So I actually took the time, stopped by these computer stores. I gave them a place to go. I gave them a number to call and said, hey, these people are willing to take walk-ins. They're willing to fix whatever fan is broken in your laptop. And we didn't leave them out in the cold. That was not one of the goals, but we did realize it's either this way, this is how we're doing this as a company, and if you can't handle that, no problem. I mean, here is a path forward that someone that still does that and is in that space for you.
Yeah, and there are providers at every level, right? Like, and I think that's one of the biggest takeaways of this is there are, and there will likely continue to be IT service providers, right? Because on the low end, I may not call them MSPs, but IT service providers that span the level of OML. So, if you're having a bad time, then you can find one that is a closer match to you, and it will probably be a better time because those companies they're set up for walk-ins and retail, right? And they're maybe their tech's working on, drop-offs, and, you come in with an immediate issue you need fixed. They can easily put aside the thing they're doing and work on your thing instead. And it's just a different level of play, essentially.
Right. And the people that work there are genuinely happy. They love just tearing apart laptops and things like that. They could do that all day long. And some of them have been there for over 10 years doing it. That's where they're happy. It's not a matter of leveling up. They're doing what they enjoy.
Yep.
We're doing what we enjoy. So there's no hard feelings here for anyone.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good way to end there.
Yeah.
I agree, man. I think that was final thoughts from everybody. And hey, Tom, thanks for crashing.
Oh, it really is fun. I know it's a good topic. So
cool. It is a good one. All right, man. Well, hey, everyone, have a good one. Go through the rest of the week. Make your businesses strong, and let's have fun.
See you next time.
Later.